so you have questions.
4 questions. 2 looking backward, and 2 looking forward.
That's okay.
First, backward. After 30 years of the end of classic, the end of the fictions, representation, reason, and history, one of the standpoints of your theory,
Yeah.
I want to ask you if you confirm or have another idea, having passed a lot of time.
The problem in architecture is still the problematics
The problematics in
are
general.
still the same, but more problematic today than they were then, because the end of the classical and the end of classical representation has spawned things outside of what I was talking about, like the digital revolution and the digital phenomenon have produced things that I'm totally antipathetic to, against, but they would argue that they're against classical representation, etc. So what has happened with the rise of the digital and the rise of the theory of the digital has come parametricism and things like this, which weren't even considering in 30 years ago, let's say. So my argument would be that that question has no relevance to, for me, what I face as a problem today in teaching today, in other words, and practicing today. I face the problem of the parametric. And the problem of the parametric is not so much the problem of representation, is how do you choose? In other words, if you can make any number of variables, any number of possibilities from one algorithm, let's say, as Philippe Morel the other day at a conference showed the chair that he made, which had 50,000 different iterations. And I said, Philippe, how do you choose? Okay, how do you choose? I don't need 50,000, you know. I mean, if I say make a bottle, right? And a student shows me 50,000 of these, I don't need 50,000 to choose. Show me, you know, if this is a bottle and this is a bottle, and they do the same thing, I prefer that one. I can make a choice. But if I'm between this one and, let's see if I have another one. No, let's say this. Let's say here. If it's between this and this, I don't know how to choose, okay? So I'm saying is the digital doesn't provide me with a matrix of choice. I don't know on what basis I choose. And so to me, the digital has produced a situation where what value judgments that I may have seem outside of the idea of choice. They have nothing to do with what I'm choosing. Okay? So therefore my text it would be different today. In other words, how about the end of the author, or the end of the single author, or the end of notation, or the end of a lot of other things that are questioned by the digital.
But you are saying digital is a kind of trouble for architecture today. It's something
Big trouble.
Big trouble.
Big trouble. That's what I'm saying. Because, well, the parametric, which gives you the possibility of infinite choice, infinite variability, right? In other words, why should this be like that or like this? You know, why is it not like this? And there's no other than I can do it in the new tools, the new digital tools. I can make bottles that do anything. Why should I do that? And that's a real
The
question.
trouble is the lack of reason.
The lack of reason.
Yeah.
And the lack of why one does anything is that there must be something significant to the discipline of architecture. In other words, if you say, build me a house, or build me a church, or build me a factory, if it doesn't say something about architecture, then it has no value for me. In other words, just to build a church, I need to say something not about churches, but about architecture. If something says nothing about architecture, then it's not interesting to me as architecture. In other words, look, let's say you can paint, all right? And you show me your painting. And you say, here's a painting of flowers, here's a landscape, maybe very pretty, right? What does it say about painting? Not the specific subject, but what does it say generally about painting? There are thousands of people that sit out in the park and paint, and it's very pretty and very nice, or they tell stories, they represent things, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
But do they, whatever they represent in their painting, does it say anything about painting? Okay? And
Yeah.
to me, that's the criterion. And then the question is, what does it mean to say something about painting? Or what does it mean to say something about architecture? And therefore, you have to go back to the history of architecture, because you have to, if you're going to say something, you have to comment on precedent. That's what has gone before, precedente.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, the most important thing in thinking about architecture today is, do we know what we're making the commentary on? In other words, are we making a commentary on Borromini, on Palladio, on Le Corbusier? What are we doing? Why are we doing anything?
Well, parametric architecture avoids any kind of commentary.
Thank you. I know, that's
Yes,
what my
no.
problem, that's
Yeah,
that's
avoids
why,
absolutely.
yeah, so I'm saying to you,
Yes,
that's
yes,
why
yeah,
I
okay,
have a
okay.
problem with
Mhm.
it. It is the problem, the big problem today is not just parametric, but phenomenological parametric, which means the interest in the things, the materiality, the surface, the texture, all of these things, which have come into the parametric as well.
Okay, but there is a flow of opinion that says that parametric, meanwhile, avoid the representation, at the same time allows designers to introduce straightly in the object itself, without any other kind of considerations. You have a lot of options that allow you to go into the object.
Yeah, but I'm interested in going into the discipline. I'm not interested in going, I want to know of what use is going into the object if it says nothing about architecture.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I understand. Okay, going back to a more general vision of the last decades, what do you think about architecture as a thing, objects, right down there, and the concepts about architecture? What is more heavy in the decision?
Manfredo Tafuri said to me, Peter, no one will care about your ideas, your theories, your concepts if you don't build. Architecture, you have to build. And I believe that's true, that I think that if we don't have artifacts, things, in some way, whether they're drawings, models, actual buildings that are examples of architectural ideas and thinking, then ideas by themselves are no good. Now, why I say that, every architect that I'm interested in, Leone Battista Alberti, wrote his De Re Edificatoria, and then he built. Aldo Rossi wrote The Architecture of the City, then he built. Bob Venturi wrote Complexity and Contradiction, then he built. Rem Koolhaas wrote Delirious New York, then he built. Okay? So every good architect, and you can go back, Palladio, Serlio, you know, whatever, Corbu, Vers une Architecture was before Poissy and Garche, etc. The ideas come first, the book comes first, but then the building. Without the book, no one would look. Those little houses of Le Corbusier, no one would have looked at them without the book. Palladio, I've been to the villas. I'm doing a book on Palladio right now. No one would care about these awful villas if he hadn't written Quattro Libri. So the relationship between ideas and buildings is very important. And no great architecture ever exists without the ideas. And the ideas have to be first. But without the building, the ideas don't matter.
Looking forward.
I'm very bad at looking forward, I have to tell you.
Looking forward.
I'm not interested.
I know you are not a magician, but
that's right.
Architecture as a field of knowledge, and
Yes.
architects as practitioners. Which are the new troubles architecture and architects have to face in the coming years, as you have already.
What our big problem is in architecture is media. There's and information. There's too much media and information demands, which are quick. And media is quick communication, right? Architecture is slow communication. So to have an architectural idea, to build an architectural idea takes a long time. Media cannot wait. Yeah, they need to have something, an image, whatever. Media devours architecture before architecture can even happen. And they need a new hero in media. I mean, and not only media, but social networks, blogs, twits, Facebook, all these things. The abundance of media has made it both more important to have architecture and less important, because people don't even look at architecture anymore. They walk down the street with their iPhones, their earphones. Architecture is too slow for them. And so it's even more important than ever that we have critical architecture, okay? But at the same time, it's even more difficult because most people don't care about architecture. Second, I believe that architecture, good architecture, requires what I call close attention, that is, on the part of the viewer. Walter Benjamin, at the last century, said that architecture was understood by the popular people in what he called a state of distraction. So I believe even more than a century ago, people are distracted. They have no real attention. They have less capacity for attention, and they don't care. So I'm saying is, more than ever, we need architecture that demands close attention, and we need a society that has the capacity to have close attention. Which means when we're training architects, we have to train them to be able to understand the problems that media has created for not only architects but their clients, and how then to get over these problems. And I think it's a big problem. I think I don't have the answer, but I'm saying is that future architectures will not be based on whether we can produce the digital, whether we're doing crowdsourcing, whether we're doing parametrics, whether we're doing 50,000 iterations of the same. What we need to understand is what kind of architecture will allow people who have no capacity for close attention to understand that that is part of a fuller, richer way of life, okay? And that architecture, more than ever, is necessary for that way of life. In the age of media, architecture is both more important and less important.
So there is a kind of new sensibilities, both in people are in architects, that we have to face with and to deal with.
Oh,
What
yes.
about new materials, nanotechnologies? Do you have any kinds of experience or think about?
My architecture doesn't depend upon material, it depends upon space. That's why, for me, Alberti is the most important architect in the history of architecture, because he's the first architect that spoke about space. Vitruvio didn't speak about space, Brunelleschi didn't speak about space, Abbé Suger didn't speak about space. Alberti was the first architect to speak about spatium, space. That is, between this wall and this wall is what's
It's an environment.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, to me, you don't need material to produce great space. I can produce very cheap buildings with very modest materials. Concrete block, bricks, stone, whatever. I don't need fancy new materials, plastics and carbon fiber things. To do my architecture, I don't need any of that. I just need dumb old material. Cement, wood, bricks, steel, you know. Basically, as I said, one of the problems is digital phenomenology. That is, the phenomenology of materials. And this is something that I think is also an enormous problem for architects today. That is, I'm for limiting choice, limiting materials, limiting options, because we don't need so much choice. We can't afford so much choice either. The society, I think it would have been much nicer for Starbucks to make one good coffee, and that's why I don't go to Starbucks. There's a little coffee shop over here I prefer, because it makes better coffee. And I can get all the variety I want at Starbucks, but over here I get a better cup of coffee.
You can read the limits
Yes.
of the space. You can understand where you are, and you can get references.
Thank you.
And perhaps identity. I understand. What about the thinkers, contemporary philosophy?
What about
Does
this?
philosophy help you nowadays to the architecture, to your own experience, after your connection with Derrida, Foucault? Is there any kind of new
No, there's no new
philosophy that
I still
may interest
believe
you?
that Derrida is really important. I still believe that the kinds of things he was talking about are really important for architecture. So I don't need another philosophy today. I'm perfectly satisfied with Foucault, with Derrida, with Roland Barthes, etc. Right? I don't need any new architects. I've got Alberti I'm working on Arroyo, I'm working on Le Corbusier. I don't need anything new. So I'm not interested in the new.
You appreciate some kind of economy.
Yeah,
You are
when
looking
you're
for-
my age, you have to have it. First of all, look, it's not very decorum is the word. When you're 80 years old, you cannot act like a 20-year-old. You cannot be crazy, right? So you have to learn how to be 80 years old, right? That doesn't mean you act like an 80-year-old, but I mean you have limits of your time, of your energy, and you're not trying to be new. You're trying to be good, let's say.
Great, yeah.
And so I don't need to be new. I need to be good. And that's what's important to me. How do you be good at
It's
80?
also important for me too.
What does good mean is really important, right? And I've not found any philosophy since the late 19th century, say late 20th century. The first 10 years of this century, the first 15 years, I don't think there's anything that interests me. I'm not interested in Alain Badiou. I'm not interested in Bruno Latour. I'm not interested in French thought today. I'm not interested in, Agamben is an interesting philosopher. I like George Agamben. There's nothing in American philosophy that, I'm too interested in. I think that Borges, if you take Borges, right? Is there anybody better in terms of what he was doing and the kinds of sensibility that he was talking about in Borges? No. And I haven't found a new one yet. Okay? Those things, understanding history, understanding literature, understanding philosophy, and going back and rereading these people is very important. Like I gave a lecture in New Mexico 2 days ago, and I said to the students, you cannot begin to understand today unless you go back and read the first 2 books of Alberti in the Dieci Libri. I said you have to go back and read book 1 and book 2. If you've never read book 1 and book 2, then you can never understand architecture. And I said, that's what you have to do. And then you can start to think about what happened in between Alberti and today. But unless you've read Alberti, you're going to be uneducated. And I'm worried about your lack of education.
Yes, going back to better understanding the present and the future. Well,
that's the best way to understand the future. You cannot understand the future because we're always living in the future, right? In relation to the past. Okay? So we need to understand the past before we can understand the future. If there is no past, there is no future.
But for the new generation, future is something very, very long. It is because a kind of intensification of the present moment.
I know.
All the energies are put there in the present.
Yeah.
I wrote a word here, ubiquity of the subject. And you told about many of the things, social, the phones, the Facebook, and so on. Do you think architecture may be a way of giving back the subject the possibility of calm?
Oh, I do think so. I think that architecture is more necessary than ever in this area of instant communication. We got to have more. There's too much communication. We need less information, less communication, less representation, less.
Okay.
Finito.
You have answered very largely my questions.
But I try.
I found it very